You never think the moment that will break your life will come in a place as quiet as a doctor's waiting room. But that's where I was, sitting on a cold plastic chair, when my daughter called to sell my life out from under me. The phone buzzed in my hand, a cheerful little vibration that felt out of place in the sterile silence. The name on the screen was my daughter, Clara. A flicker of warmth went through me. She'd been so attentive since her father died. But when I answered, her voice was different. It was flat, cold, like a stone you'd find at the bottom of a river. "Mom," she said, not even a hello. "We're going on a trip to Japan tomorrow. I already sold your cabin on Mount Hood and your car. We needed the money. Bye." Click. Just like that. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone a dull hum in the silence. The words didn't make sense at first. They were just sounds. Cabin. Car. Sold. I lowered the phone and stared at it, as if it could explain the hollow, cold feeling spreading through my chest. All those years of raising her, of loving her, of sacrificing for her, and she discarded me like garbage, with a phone call that lasted less than 30 seconds. But then a strange thing happened. A calm settled over me, a stillness I hadn't felt since my Arthur passed away 8 months ago. Because you see, there was something my dear daughter didn't know. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 72 years old, and until that very moment, I thought I knew my only child. The world around me started to come back into focus. The muted beige walls of the clinic, the faint smell of antiseptic, the soft rustle of magazines as other patients waited for their own bad news. I saw them looking at me with pity. They'd seen an old woman get a phone call that made her go pale. They thought they knew what was happening. They had no idea. Because in that moment of cold betrayal, I remembered something. A secret I had buried under 8 months of grief. A week before he died, Arthur had handed me a thick manila envelope. His hands, usually so steady, had trembled slightly. "Eleanor," he'd said, his voice a low, serious whisper. "Put this in the bottom drawer of your dresser. Don't look at it. Not yet. If something happens to me, open it after a while. But only when you feel ready. Truly ready." I had nodded, my heart already aching with a fear I couldn't name. I'd done as he asked, tucking the envelope away beneath my sweaters. And after he was gone, the grief was so thick, so all-consuming, that I forgot it was even there. It became just another part of the landscape of my loss. But now, sitting in that uncomfortable chair, my daughter's icy words still hanging in the air, I remembered. The envelope. Arthur's secret. "Eleanor Vance." The nurse called my name, smiling kindly. I stood up, my legs steady. I smiled back. It wasn't the smile of a heartbroken woman. It was the smile of a woman who had just discovered she was holding a winning ticket she didn't even know she had. The doctor examined me, said I was in remarkable health for my age. I nodded, I smiled, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. It was back in my quiet house, in my bedroom, in that dresser drawer. My daughter thought she had left me with nothing. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that my Arthur, my dear, quiet, brilliant Arthur, had always been a man who planned ahead. I walked out of the clinic into the soft, gray Portland drizzle. I didn't call a cab. For the first time in 50 years, I walked to a bus stop. Clara had sold my car, after all. According to her, I had nothing left. As I stood there watching the rain streak down the bus shelter glass, I couldn't help but let a real smile touch my lips. It felt foreign on my face. It felt powerful, because the game had just begun. And my daughter, for all her cold calculation, had no idea she wasn't the only one who knew how to play. The bus ride home was a journey through a ghost town of my own memories. Every corner we turned, every stop we made, held an echo of Arthur. There was the bakery where he'd buy a fresh baguette every Sunday. The park bench where we'd shared coffee and watched the world go by. The old movie theater where he'd held my hand in the dark for 50 years. The rain blurred it all into a watercolor painting of a life I thought was over. But for the first time, the sadness wasn't all-consuming. Underneath, it was a current of something else. Anticipation. I got off the bus a block from my house, my sensible shoes splashing in the puddles. Our house, my house, a sturdy craftsman bungalow with a deep porch, looked back at me. It had felt so empty these past months. A shell. But now it felt like a vault. And inside was a secret waiting to be claimed. I unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound. It had been Arthur's father's clock. Its steady rhythm had always been the heartbeat of our home. I hung my damp coat on the hook and my eyes went straight down the hall, toward my bedroom. My heart began to thud, a slow, heavy beat that felt loud in the silence. This was it, the moment of truth. I walked into the bedroom, the floorboards creaking their familiar greeting. The room still smelled faintly of Arthur's sandalwood soap. I went to the dresser, an old, solid oak piece we'd bought together. My hands, suddenly clumsy, pulled open the bottom drawer. I pushed aside soft cashmere sweaters, my fingers searching until they brushed against thick, smooth paper. There it was, the manila envelope. I carried it to the bed, the same bed we'd shared for a lifetime, and sat on the edge. The envelope felt heavy, not with weight, but with meaning. Arthur's neat, precise handwriting spelled out my name for Eleanor. With a deep breath that did little to calm my trembling hands, I undid the clasp and slowly tipped the contents onto the quilt. A cascade of papers fanned out, legal documents with official seals and dense paragraphs. But on top was a simple sheet of lined notepaper filled with Arthur's handwriting. I picked it up and my vision blurred with tears. Just seeing his words felt like hearing his voice after a long silence. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. Forgive me for not telling you everything while I was alive. I never wanted you to worry. You have always been so busy worrying about everyone else. I had to stop, a sob catching in my throat. He knew me so well. Over the years, my love, I invested our savings. Carefully, quietly. Teaching high school chemistry didn't make us rich, but the patents from my early research and the wise investments that followed, well, we did all right. We did more than all right. The cabin was never our only property, Eleanor. We own the fourplex on Alberta Street. We own the little blue house on Skidmore. We own the apartment building in the Pearl District, the one where Clara and David live. My breath hitched. I read the sentence again. The one where Clara and David live. You are a rich woman, my love. You always were, in all the ways that truly matter. But now on paper, too. Everything is in the name of a company, Vance Holdings. And you, my darling, are the sole owner. I let the letter fall to my lap for a moment, my head spinning. I looked at the other documents. Deeds. Bank statements. The numbers on them were staggering. This wasn't just comfortable money. This was generational wealth. My quiet, unassuming husband, who packed a lunch every day and drove a 10-year-old Volvo, had built a secret empire. I picked up the letter again, my hands now shaking in earnest. I kept this from Clara for a reason. I saw how David looked at our things, Eleanor. I saw the calculation in his eyes. I wanted our daughter to love us for who we are, not for what we have. I fear if she knew, everything would change. I wanted to protect you from that. The irony was so profound it was almost painful. Arthur's fear had been a prophecy. Clara, not knowing our true situation, had shown us exactly who she was. She had seen us as having so little, and she had taken it anyway. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't happiness. It was power. A deep, quiet, formidable power. The kind Arthur had always wielded with such gentle strength. I gathered the papers, holding them to my chest. I looked around the room, at the photographs on the wall. There was one of Arthur and me on the porch of the Mount Hood cabin, our arms around each other, laughing into the sun. The cabin Clara had so casually sold. In that moment, my grief shifted. It was no longer a passive weight. It became a fuel. Arthur hadn't just left me money. He had left me a weapon. And he had left me a choice. I could call Clara. I could tell her everything. I could watch her backpedal, listen to her excuses. I could reclaim my things with a single phone call to a lawyer. But as I sat there in the deepening twilight, the rain still tapping gently on the roof, I knew I wouldn't. That would be too easy. Too quick. Clara had treated my life, our memories, Arthur's legacy, as a transaction. She had offered me a 20% share of my own soul. No, a simple reversal wouldn't teach her a thing. It would only teach her that her actions had no lasting consequences. I carefully, reverently, placed all the documents back into the envelope. I walked to the dresser and put it back in its hiding place. But this time, I didn't forget it was there. I knew exactly what it was. My map. My compass. I went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea. The ordinary action felt different. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the poor, pitted widow. I was Eleanor Vance, the silent keeper of a great secret. My daughter thought she had left me with nothing. But as I waited for the kettle to boil, I knew the truth. She had left me with everything. And soon, very soon, she would learn that the quietest people are often the most dangerous, because they have the strength to wait. The kettle whistled, a sharp, cheerful sound that sliced through the heavy silence of the house. As I poured the boiling water over the tea bag, watching the brown tendrils cloud the cup, my mind was no longer racing. It was focused, calm. The shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. Clara's betrayal was a door slamming shut on the life I had known. But Arthur's envelope was a key, unlocking a different path entirely. I carried my tea to the small kitchen table, the same one where Arthur and I had shared thousands of meals. The surface was worn, etched with the ghosts of our life together. I ran my fingers over a small scratch Clara had made as a child, a memory that now felt like it belonged to someone else. The woman who had cherished that scratch would have been destroyed by that phone call. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was an architect, and it was time to draw up the plans. My first move was obvious. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I chose a simple navy blue dress. The one Arthur said brought out the silver in my hair and a single string of pearls. I looked in the mirror and saw a dignified widow. No one would see the steel forming in her spine. I didn't call a taxi. I walked to the bus stop again, a deliberate choice. I needed to feel the reality of the world Clara thought she had left me in. The bus ride downtown was a study in ordinary life. People scrolling on phones, chatting about their weekends. I felt like a spy moving among them, my simple secret making me feel profoundly separate. The law offices of Henderson and Associates were in an old, respectable building with polished brass and marble floors. It smelled of lemonwood polish and important paper. Mr. Henderson had been Arthur's friend long before he was his lawyer. He was a kind man with a thoughtful face and eyes that had seen every kind of family trouble. "Eleanor," he said, rising from his desk as I was shown in. His voice was warm with concern. "It's good to see you. How are you holding up?" I didn't smile. I simply placed the manila envelope on his desk. "I'm better than I expected, Charles. Arthur left me with some instructions." He opened the envelope, his professional demeanor taking over. I watched his face as he read. His eyebrows rose slightly. He shuffled through the deeds, the bank statements. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of astonishment and dawning understanding. "Good heavens, Eleanor." I knew Arthur was a shrewd man, but this is extraordinary. "It is," I agreed, my voice steady. "And now I need your help." "Of course. We can file the necessary paperwork to transfer everything into your name immediately. We can have this sorted in a matter of days." "No," I said, and the word hung in the quiet room. Mr. Henderson looked puzzled. "I'm sorry. I don't want anything transferred. Not yet. And I don't want anyone to know. Especially not Clara." I laid it out for him. The phone call, the sale of the cabin and the car, the cold, transactional nature of it all. As I spoke, his face softened with pity, but I held up a hand. "I don't want your sympathy, Charles. I want your discretion. I want you to quietly, legally, nullify the sale of the cabin and recover Arthur's Volvo. I want you to ensure I have complete, uncontestable control of every asset in that envelope, particularly the apartment building on Belmont where my daughter resides. And I want it all done in absolute secrecy." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Eleanor, What you're asking, it's highly unusual. The sale of the cabin was fraudulent, yes. We can easily reverse it. But to keep all of this a secret? May I ask, what is your ultimate goal here? I met his gaze. My goal is not revenge, Charles. It's education. My daughter needs to learn the value of the things she so carelessly threw away. And some lessons can't be taught with words. They have to be lived. He was silent for a long moment, studying me. I think he saw Arthur's determination in my eyes. Finally, he nodded. All right, Eleanor. You're the client. I'll handle everything. It will take a few weeks to do this properly and quietly. That's fine, I said. I've learned the value of patience. Leaving his office, I felt a surge of purpose. The game was afoot, as Arthur would have said with a twinkle in his eye. I walked through the bustling streets of Portland, but now I saw the city with new eyes. That coffee shop? I owned the building. That little bookstore? My company was their landlord. I was a ghost, walking through a kingdom I owned, unseen and unknown. When I got back to my street, I saw my neighbor, Beatrice, tending to her roses. She was a good soul, but her kindness was often laced with gossip. She saw me and waved, her face immediately folding into an expression of concern. Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. I heard about Clara leaving. Oh, you poor dear. All alone in that big house. I summoned the performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders slump just a little. I offered a small, brave smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. It's difficult, Beatrice, I said, my voice soft. But I'll manage. One day at a time. Oh, you're so strong, she clucked, coming over to pat my arm. You let me know if you need anything, you hear? A casserole? Someone to go to the store with you. Thank you, Beatrice. That's so kind. I accepted her pity like a costume I was putting on. It was my camouflage. Later that week, I was in my garden when a taxi pulled up down the street. Clara and David emerged, laughing, hauling expensive-looking luggage from the trunk. They were flush with the excitement of their impending adventure with the money from my life. I stood perfectly still, partially hidden by a hydrangea bush, and watched them. They were so sure of themselves, so careless. David loaded the bags without a glance in my direction. Clara, for one fleeting second, looked toward the house. I saw her face. There was no guilt, no hesitation, just a faint impatience, as if she were already on her way to a better life. Then she turned, said something to David that made him laugh, and they disappeared inside their apartment. My heart, which I expected to break, simply grew colder, harder. I went inside my quiet, empty house and closed the door. I was no longer just playing a part. I was the architect now, and I knew with a chilling clarity what the next phase of the blueprint required. They thought they were leaving me behind, but the truth was I was already ahead of them, waiting in the shadows they didn't even know existed. The foundation had been laid. Now it was time to build. The silence after Clara left was different. It was no longer an empty space filled with grief. It was a workshop, a laboratory. In the weeks that followed, I settled into the rhythm of my double life with a quiet intensity that would have surprised anyone who saw me. My mornings belonged to Eleanor Vance, the pitiable widow. I'd put on my soft, worn-out cardigan and walk to the local market, a reusable bag over my arm. I'd move slowly, smiling faintly at the butcher who gave me an extra thick cut of meat on sale, and the baker who always slipped an extra roll into my bag. Their kindness was genuine, and I accepted it with a gratitude that was also genuine, even if the poverty it was meant to alleviate was a carefully constructed fiction. Any word from Clara, Eleanor? Beatrice would ask, catching me as I watered my petunias, her voice hushed with morbid curiosity. I'd let my hand tremble just a little on the watering can. A postcard from Tokyo. I'd lie, my voice wistful. It's so beautiful there. I'm happy for them. And I'd turn away before she could see the complete lack of emotion in my eyes. But my afternoons? My afternoons belonged to the other Eleanor, the one who would sit at Arthur's old oak desk, a desk I had barely touched since he died, and open the files Mr. Henderson sent over by secure courier. I learned about property management, about equity, and dividends. I pored over the financial statements for the apartment building on Belmont, noting the steady flow of rent that was unbeknownst to anyone, flowing into an account I controlled. I was becoming a businesswoman, and I found a sharp, unexpected satisfaction in it. It felt like a connection to Arthur, a shared language I was only now learning to speak. A month after Clara left, I decided to visit the cabin. I took the bus as far as I could, then hired a car for the winding drive up Mount Hood. The air grew crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. When the car pulled up to the familiar clearing, my breath caught. It was exactly as I remembered. The A-frame structure, the wide porch Arthur had built with his own hands, the towering firs standing as silent sentinels. But there were new potted plants on the steps. A bicycle leaned against a tree, signs of a life that was not ours. I didn't go inside. I just sat on a fallen log across the driveway and watched. I could almost hear the echoes, Clara's childhood laughter as she chased fireflies, the sizzle of Arthur's famous pancakes on the griddle, the warm weight of his arm around my shoulders as we watched the stars emerge. A man came out, the new owner. He saw me and smiled, approaching with the easy friendliness of someone who feels secure in his domain. "Afternoon. Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice soft. I knew the previous owners, the Vances. His face lit up with recognition. "Oh, yes, a real shame. The daughter told us her mother was quite ill, needed to sell fast to cover medical bills. We felt bad, but it was a good opportunity for us." The lie was so casual, so cruel. Quite ill. Clara had painted me as a feeble burden to justify her theft. The pain was a sharp, fresh stab. "I'm glad it went to someone who appreciates it," I managed to say. "We love it," he said, beaming. "Although it's been a bit of a mess legally. Turns out the sale wasn't quite right. We're getting our money back, but we have to move out. A real headache." I just nodded. How unfortunate. Driving away, the beautiful scenery blurred by my tears. It wasn't just the money. It was the sheer, casual brutality of the stories she'd invented to erase me. The unraveling began, as I knew it would, with David. Mr. Henderson called me one evening, his voice crisp and professional. "Eleanor, there's movement. The banks are starting to call in David's loans. It seems he was using the Belmont apartment as collateral for multiple lines of credit. They're discovering, rather quickly, that he has no legal claim to the property." A few days later, Beatrice was at my door, her eyes wide with the thrill of being the bearer of juicy news. "Eleanor, you'll never believe it. I just heard from my cousin at the bank. David is in deep trouble. Loans, debts, and Clara. She's coming back from Japan. Alone. Apparently, the whole thing was a disaster." She searched my face for a reaction. I gave her one. I let my hand fly to my mouth, my eyes widening in shock. "Oh no. My poor Clara. Alone? When?" "Any day now, I hear," Beatrice said, satisfied with my performance. What a mess that man has made. I closed the door, leaning against it. The moment was here. The carefully laid pieces were beginning to fall. I called Mr. Henderson. "It's time, Charles." "The eviction notice?" he asked. "Yes. Have it delivered the day after she returns. Let her have one night in the apartment she helped steal. Let her think, for just a moment, that she's home." I hung up and walked to the window. The street was quiet. The sky was turning the color of a bruise, promising another Portland rain. I felt no triumph, only a cold, grim necessity. The education of my daughter was about to begin. The architect had drawn the plans. The demolition was underway. And soon, the rebuilding would start. But first, Clara had to truly understand what it felt like to have the floor drop out from under you. I knew the feeling well. Now it was her turn. The rain started that night, a gentle percussion on the roof that lasted until morning. It felt like the city itself was weeping for what was to come. I slept little, my mind playing out the scene again and again. How would she look? What would she say? The architect in me had planned the structure, but the mother in me dreaded the human wreckage. Beatrice, my ever-reliable town crier, arrived just after breakfast, her raincoat dripping onto my welcome mat. Her face was a mask of dramatic concern. "Eleanor, she's back," she whispered, as if sharing a state secret. "I saw her get out of a taxi last night. Just one suitcase. She looked awful. Pale as a ghost. And alone, Eleanor. Completely alone. I made my face crumple on cue. Oh heavens. My poor girl. I wrung my hands, a gesture I'd perfected. I should go to her. Give her time, Beatrice advised, placing a comforting hand on my arm. She must be so embarrassed. But I didn't have to wait long. The phone rang later that morning, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet house. I knew who it was before I picked it up. The number was blocked, but the hesitance on the other end of the line was a language I understood. Mom. Her voice was small, a frayed thread of sound. It was the voice of a child who had fallen and scraped her knees, not the cold, calculated woman from the doctor's office. Clara? Honey, is that you? Where are you? I layered my voice with worry and confusion. A choked sob escaped her. I'm at the apartment. Mom, something terrible has happened. Can I please come over? I have nowhere else to go. The words hung between us. I have nowhere else to go. They were the exact words I had felt in my soul for 8 months. Now they were hers. Of course, darling. Of course, come right over. This is your home. I hung up and prepared the stage. I put the kettle on. I took out 2 china cups, the ones with the little blue forget-me-nots that she had always loved as a girl. I placed a box of tissues discreetly on the kitchen table. Then I waited. When the doorbell rang, it was a timid, uncertain sound. I opened the door to the wreck of my daughter. The transformation was shocking. The confident woman who had left for Japan was gone. In her place stood someone hollowed out. She had lost weight, and her expensive clothes hung on her frame, wrinkled and stained from travel. Her hair was lank, and her eyes were red raw and shadowed by deep purple bruises of exhaustion. She clutched a single suitcase, as if it were a life preserver. Mom, she breathed, and for a second I thought she might collapse into my arms. But she stopped herself, hovering on the threshold, shame keeping her at a distance. She remembered how she had left me. Come in out of the rain, I said, my voice soft. I took her suitcase, its surprising lightness speaking volumes, and guided her to the kitchen. She sat at the table, her shoulders slumped while I poured the tea. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely hold the cup. He left me, Mom, she began, the story tumbling out in a torrent of tears and ragged breaths. In Tokyo. There was no business. It was all a lie. He took the money and he left me for some girl he met online. He emptied our accounts. He just vanished. I listened, making soft, sympathetic noises. I passed her a tissue. I played my part flawlessly. And that's not all, she wept, her voice rising in panic. The debts, Mom. He had so many debts. And he used my name. He forged my signature. The banks are calling me. And then yesterday I got this. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a crumpled legal document, slapping it down on the table. The eviction notice. The sight of it, there in my own kitchen, sent a jolt through me. They're kicking me out. In 30 days. I have no money, no job, no husband, and now no home. She dissolved into helpless, body-racking sobs. He ruined me. He ruined everything. I let her cry. I let the full weight of her consequences press down on her. I waited until the storm subsided into shaky hiccups. Then I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was ice cold. Clara, listen to me, I said, my voice steady and calm. You listen. This is your home. It has always been your home. You can stay here for as long as you need. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. After what I did, how I treated you, how can you even look at me? This was the crucial moment, the first lesson. You are my daughter, I said, holding her gaze. That will never change. We'll figure this out. Together. It wasn't forgiveness. Not really. It was strategy. But the relief that washed over her face was genuine. It was the relief of a drowning person who has been thrown a rope, never suspecting the person holding the other end might have their own reasons for pulling her in. She moved her suitcase into her old childhood room that afternoon. I watched her unpack the meager remains of her life. A few clothes, a photograph of her and David that she immediately tucked into a drawer face down. Every movement was heavy with humiliation. That night, as she slept the exhausted sleep of the defeated, I stood in the hallway outside her door. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of her suffering. I felt a pang of something sharp and painful, not guilt, but a profound sorrow for the way things had to be. The prodigal daughter had returned, but there would be no fatted calf, no celebration. There would only be the long, hard road back, and I would be her guide, leading her through a darkness I knew all too well. She thought she had hit rock bottom, but as I turned and walked back to my own room, I knew the true descent was only just beginning. The first few days were a study in quiet devastation. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, her presence a faint, sad echo. She jumped at the sound of the phone, terrified it was a debt collector. She flinched when a car door slammed outside, a relic of the fear that David might somehow reappear. The confident woman who had sold my life was gone, replaced by a nervous, hollowed-out stranger. I watched her, this new version of my daughter, with a heart that felt like it was cracking and hardening at the same time. The mother in me wanted to gather her up, to tell her everything would be all right, to make her a cup of tea and promise to fix it all. The architect, the secret keeper, remained silent. The lesson was not over. In fact, it had only just begun. A week after her return, I found her at the kitchen table, the classified section of the newspaper spread out before her. She'd circled a few ads with a trembling hand. Waitressing, retail, jobs she hadn't considered since she was a teenager. Finding anything? I asked, keeping my tone light, neutral. She shook her head, not looking up. No one wants to hire someone with problems. I can see it in their eyes when I try to explain the gap in my resume. She finally met my gaze, her eyes desperate. Mom, what am I going to do? The eviction date is getting closer. I can't have that on my record. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. She was terrified of an eviction from a building she technically, through me, owned. There's always work, I said gently. It might not be the work you want, but it's honest. She looked down at her hands, once perfectly manicured, now bitten to the quick. I know. The next day, she came home with the faint smell of bleach on her clothes. Her shoulders were slumped, her feet dragging. She dropped her keys on the side table with a sound of utter defeat. How was it? I asked from my armchair, where I was pretending to read. She let out a short, humorless laugh. I got a job, cleaning offices, the night shift. I put my book down. Cleaning. It was the only thing that didn't require a credit check or a stable work history. She wouldn't look at me. I start tomorrow, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And so, the education of Clara Vance entered its most brutal phase. I watched my daughter, who had once hosted charity galas, put on a shapeless uniform and leave the house each night to scrub toilets and vacuum floors. The humiliation was a physical aura around her. When she returned at dawn, she was gray with exhaustion, her spirit seeming a little more frayed each time. One morning, after a particularly rough shift, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, her hands shaking so badly the spoon rattled against the mug. There's a woman who works there, she said, her voice flat. Her name is Sharon. She's been doing this for 20 years. She has arthritis in both hands, but she still shows me how to wring the mop properly, so I don't waste bleach. Clara looked up, and for the first time, I saw something beyond self-pity in her eyes. I saw a dawning, horrifying understanding. She told me there are two types of people who end up doing that job. The ones who never had a chance, and the ones who threw their chance away. She asked me which one I was. My breath caught. This was it. The crack in the shell. What did you tell her? I asked softly. I told her the truth. Her voice was a whisper. I told her I had every chance. A family, a home, a legacy. And I threw it all away for a man who saw me as a line of credit. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She just nodded and said, Well, at least you know. That puts you ahead of most. In that moment, I saw a flicker of the woman Clara could become. Humbled, self-aware. It was a small spark, but it was real. My own resolve was tested constantly. Mr. Henderson called with updates. We've recovered the Volvo, Eleanor. It's in storage, and the title to the cabin is clear and back in your name. Each piece of good news felt like a stone added to the burden of my secret. I'd hang up the phone and see Clara trudging up the walkway. Her head bowed against the rain, and my heart would ache. Beatrice, of course, was a constant audience to our tragedy. "Oh, Eleanor, it just breaks my heart to see her like that," she'd sigh, watching Clara leave one night. "That beautiful girl, cleaning offices. How the mighty have fallen." Her words, meant as sympathy, felt like vinegar in a wound. This wasn't a spectacle. This was my daughter's soul being slowly, painfully rebuilt. One night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen for water and found Clara sitting in the dark, still in her uniform, just staring at the wall. "You should get some rest, honey," I said. She didn't turn. "I can't stop thinking, Mom. About Dad. About what he would think of me if he could see this." I stayed silent, letting the weight of the question hang in the air. "He taught me to be responsible, to value family, to work hard." Her voice broke. And I did the exact opposite. I was selfish. I was greedy. I ruined everything he built. She was finally there, not just lamenting her circumstances, but confronting her own character. The architect in me knew the foundation was almost ready. The mother in me wept for the pain it took to get there. I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a real gesture, not a performed one. "People make mistakes, Clara. The important thing is what you do next." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "How do I fix this, Mom? How do I ever make up for what I did to you?" I looked at my daughter, sitting in the dark of the home she had tried to take from me, and I felt the first, faint stirring of something I thought had died. Hope. "You already are," I said quietly. The long road down was nearing its end. She had finally reached the bottom, and it was only from the very bottom that she could begin to climb back up. The change in Clara was subtle at first, like the first hint of light before dawn. The helpless sobs became less frequent, replaced by a quiet, grim determination. She still came home from her cleaning shift looking exhausted, but the defeat in her shoulders was slowly morphing into something else. Resilience. She was learning to carry the weight. I watched her one morning, meticulously counting out her earnings from a small envelope of cash, setting aside a portion for bus fare, a portion for groceries she insisted on buying. She was budgeting with a focus I'd never seen in her before. The woman who had once thought nothing of a $200 haircut was now calculating the cost of a loaf of bread. It was time. I waited until we were having a quiet cup of tea together. The rain pattered softly against the window, a familiar Portland soundtrack. "Clara," I began, my voice carefully neutral. "I made an appointment for us." She looked up, wary. "An appointment? With who?" "With a lawyer. A friend of your father's. Mr. Henderson." Panic flashed in her eyes. "A lawyer? Mom, I can't afford a lawyer. I can't afford anything. Is this about the eviction?" "I'll be out before the date, I promise. I just need to find a place." "It's not about that," I interrupted calmly. "Mr. Henderson has offered to look at your situation with David, pro bono, as a favor to your father." The lie came easily. It was the final piece of the performance. She looked skeptical, but a flicker of hope sparked behind the fear. "What can he do? The debts are in my name. The forged signatures, it's my word against a mountain of paper." "Let's just see what he has to say," I said, placing my hand over hers. "What's the harm?" The morning of the appointment, Clara dressed in the best outfit she had left, a simple black dress that hung a little loose on her. She looked nervous, wringing her hands on the bus ride downtown. I sat beside her, my own heart a drumbeat in my chest. This was the moment of unveiling, the end of the secret. Mr. Henderson's office felt the same as it had months ago. Quiet, imposing, smelling of leather and importance. But this time, I wasn't alone in the client's chair. Clara sat next to me, perched on the edge, looking small and vulnerable. "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Henderson said, greeting me with a respectful nod. Then he turned to Clara. "Clara, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He got straight to business. He slid a thin folder across his massive oak desk. "I've had my team look into the financial situation with David." Clara's hands shook as she opened the folder. She scanned the first page, then the next. Her brow furrowed in confusion. I don't understand. This says the signatures are inconsistent, that there's evidence of forgery, that I'm not liable for the majority of the debt. She looked up at Mr. Henderson, her eyes wide. How is this possible? The bank said it was airtight. A thorough investigation can uncover many things, Mr. Henderson said smoothly. With this evidence, we can petition to have your name cleared. The legal process will take some time, but the outcome is virtually guaranteed. Tears of relief welled in Clara's eyes. For a moment, she looked like the little girl I used to comfort after a nightmare. I don't know what to say. Thank you. But who paid for this? This kind of investigation must have cost a fortune. Mr. Henderson's eyes flickered to me. This was it. Clara, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. There's something I need to tell you. She turned to me, the confusion on her face deepening. Mom. I nodded to Mr. Henderson. Without a word, he opened a drawer and placed a second, much thicker folder on the desk. It was identical to the one I had first brought him. This, I said, tapping the folder, is what your father left me. Clara stared at it, then back at me. Slowly, as if handling a live explosive, she opened it. She saw the deeds first. She recognized the addresses. Her eyes scanned the bank statements, the numbers so large they seemed to blur. Then she saw it. The deed for the apartment building on Belmont. Her building. The owner of record, Vance Holdings. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and then a slow, horrifying shock. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. You own my building? Her voice was a hoarse whisper. Yes. How long? The question was sharp, laced with a pain I had anticipated but still wasn't prepared for. Since the day you called me from the doctor's office. The words hung in the air, stark and brutal. The entire timeline of her suffering, the eviction, the cleaning job, the humiliation, played out across her face in a matter of seconds. She had been living a nightmare, and I had held the key to wake her up the entire time. The tears of relief were gone, replaced by something colder. Betrayal. You knew, she whispered, the sound scraping from her throat. You knew all of this when I came back? When I was crying? When I was cleaning toilets? You knew you could fix everything, and you just watched? The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Mr. Henderson looked discreetly at his hands. I met her gaze, my own steady. This was the reckoning. Yes, I said, my voice soft but unwavering. I knew, and I watched, because you needed to learn something that I couldn't just tell you, Clara. You needed to learn the value of what you threw away. It wasn't just a cabin. It wasn't just a car. It was family. It was trust. It was love. I couldn't just give you a check and make you understand that. You had to lose it all to realize what it was worth. She stared at me, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The architect had finally shown the client the blueprints, and the client was staring at a foundation built on her own pain. The secret was out. The classroom was now in session, and the final, most difficult lesson had just begun. The silence in Mr. Henderson's office was absolute. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, full of unspoken words and the echoes of a shattered world. Clara stared at me, her face a pale mask of shock. The documents lay between us on the desk, a testament to a truth she was still struggling to comprehend. You knew, she whispered again, the words barely audible. All this time, you let me believe we had nothing. You let me scrub floors. You let me be terrified of debt collectors. You let me think I had ruined my life. Her voice began to rise, trembling with a mixture of fury and devastation. How could you? What kind of mother does that? Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably, but I held up a hand. This was between me and my daughter. The kind of mother who loves you enough to let you fall, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. The kind of mother who knew that if I caught you, you would never learn how to stand on your own. This wasn't letting me fall, Mom. This was torture. You held the key to my cage, and you just watched me rattle the bars. What did you think would happen, Clara? I asked, my own emotion finally breaking through the calm. Did you think you could sell my home, sell your father's car, discard me like yesterday's newspaper, and there would be no consequences? That I would just forgive and forget because you said you were sorry? I was desperate, she cried, tears streaming down her face. So was I. The words burst from me, sharp and true. I was sitting in that doctor's office, 8 months a widow, and my only child called to tell me she'd sold my memories for a plane ticket. You were desperate for money. I was desperate for my daughter. The truth of that hung in the air. Clara's anger seemed to deflate, replaced by a dawning, horrible understanding. She looked from the papers back to my face, really seeing me for the first time in years, not as her mother, a constant, unthinking fixture in her life, but as a person she had deeply wounded. You wanted me to feel what it was like, she said slowly, the realization washing over her, to have everything taken away. I wanted you to understand the value of what you were so willing to throw away, I corrected gently. Not the money, not the properties, but the trust, the security of knowing you are loved unconditionally. You took that from me, Clara, and I knew that if I simply gave it back to you, you'd never understand its worth. She was silent for a long time, staring at her hands clenched in her lap. The fight had gone out of her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear, though filled with a profound sorrow. The cleaning job, she said. Sharon, the woman I work with, she said the difference between being rich and acting rich is knowing the value of your own effort. A tear traced a path down her cheek. You didn't just let me fall. You made sure I landed somewhere I could learn to pick myself up. I nodded, my own eyes stinging. Yes. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I don't deserve any of this. She gestured to the folder. I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve this money. This was never about what you deserve, I said. It was about who you could become. Mr. Henderson, sensing the storm had passed, spoke softly. Clara, the legal path is clear. We can have your name cleared of all debts within a few weeks. The assets are yours to control. Clara looked at the papers, then at me. A change came over her face. It was a look of determination, but a quiet, mature one. I don't want control, she said. Not yet. She turned to Mr. Henderson. Thank you, but I want to keep my job. I want to pay for my own classes. Classes? I asked. I'm going back to school, she said, her voice gaining strength, for social work. I need to do something that means something, and I need to pay for it myself. She looked directly at me. You were right, Mom. I had to learn, and I'm not done learning yet. If you just hand me this, it will all have been for nothing. In that moment, I saw not my broken little girl, but a strong, resilient woman. The lesson had been harsh, but it had taken root. She wasn't rejecting the gift. She was honoring the journey it took to earn the wisdom to receive it. We left the office together, not as a mother leading a chastened child, but as two women walking side by side. The silence between us now was different. It was no longer heavy with betrayal, but thoughtful, filled with the possibility of a new beginning. The reckoning was over. The forgiveness had begun. Not the easy forgiveness of words, but the hard, earned forgiveness of changed hearts and a shared understanding of the terrible, beautiful cost of love. The silence in the car was different now. It wasn't the brittle, angry silence of the past few days. This was a quiet, thoughtful space, filled with the hum of the Volvo's engine and the whisper of the tires on the wet pavement. We were driving east, leaving the gray drizzle of Portland behind for the deep, evergreen embrace of Mount Hood. Clara hadn't spoken much since we left the house, but she'd looked at me before getting in the car and given a small, tentative nod. It was enough. I'd suggested the trip that morning over coffee. I thought we could go to the cabin today. She had looked up from her mug, her eyes wary but curious. The cabin? It's ours again, I'd said simply. I thought we should see it. Together. Now, as the city faded in the rearview mirror, I could feel the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She rolled down the window a crack, breathing in the sharp, clean scent of pine. It was the smell of our summers, of bonfires and bug spray, of her father's laughter echoing through the trees. When I turned onto the final, familiar dirt road, I saw her hands clench slightly in her lap. This was the moment of truth. The place where so many memories lived, and where her betrayal had cut the deepest. The cabin came into view, nestled in its clearing just as it had always been. The potted plants were gone from the porch. It stood waiting, a little lonely but intact. I pulled up and turned off the engine. The silence that rushed in was profound, broken only by the chirping of birds and the sigh of the wind in the tall firs. For a long moment, neither of us moved. We just sat, looking at the home Arthur built. I thought it would feel different, Clara said, her voice soft, almost reverent. I thought it would feel tainted. And does it? I asked. She shook her head slowly. No, it just feels like home. She turned to me, her eyes glistening. I'm so sorry, Mom. For this. For all of it. I don't know how you can even look at me here. This is exactly where I need to look at you, I said, opening my car door. Come on. We got out and walked up the path. My key turned smoothly in the lock. The door swung open with its familiar creak. The inside was exactly as the new owners had left it, clean, impersonal. But underneath the faint smell of strangers, our life was still here. The groove in the floorboards where Arthur's favorite chair had sat. The faint smoke stain on the fireplace bricks. The view from the window, the same majestic sweep of mountain and sky. Clara walked through the living room, her fingers trailing over the mantelpiece. She stopped in front of a framed photograph that still hung on the wall. It was a picture of her, aged 7, sitting on Arthur's shoulders, both of them grinning, with the cabin still unfinished behind them. She reached out and touched the glass over her father's face. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. This is where he taught me to whittle, she whispered. Right there on the porch. This is where you taught me to make pancakes. This is where I brought my first boyfriend, and Dad grilled him about his intentions until the poor boy was sweating. She let out a wet, choked laugh. I sold all of that. I reduced a lifetime of love to a line on a bank statement. I came to stand beside her. But you didn't destroy it, Clara. You can't destroy real love. You can only forget it for a while. She turned to me, her face raw with emotion. I remember now, Mom. I remember it all. And I will never, ever forget it again. We spent the day there. We didn't talk much. We opened windows to air the place out. We swept the porch. We sat on the steps, just as we used to, and watched the afternoon light slant through the trees. It was there, in the quiet of the mountain, that the last of the wall between us crumbled. The architect's plan was complete. The structure had been tested, and it had held. What remained was simply a mother and a daughter, surrounded by the legacy of a man who had loved them both enough to plan for this very moment. As the sun began to dip behind the mountain, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara spoke. Mom, she said, her voice clear and strong, I have an idea. About the cabin. I looked at her, at the determined set of her jaw, so like her father's. I'm listening. I don't think we should just keep it for ourselves. Not anymore. She gestured to the peaceful clearing around us. This place, it heals people. It healed me. What if we made it a place for other women? Women who are leaving bad situations, like I did. A place where they can come to breathe, to figure out their next steps. A temporary shelter. I looked at my daughter, at the compassion and strength shining in her eyes, and my heart felt so full I thought it might burst. Arthur's legacy was not the wood and nails of this cabin. It was the love that had built it. And now, that love was going to be shared. I reached over and took her hand. It was warm and solid in mine. I think that's a perfect idea, Clara. I think your father would have loved that. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. The best sanctuaries are the ones that are shared. We sat there together, hand in hand, as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. The long winter was over. A new season was beginning. And for the first time since Arthur left us, I knew, without a doubt, that everything was going to be all right.